All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Caregiving Cafe. Today we have Michael Gill from Texas Senior Living Locators, who is our speaker today, and will be telling us about senior living levels, the care and services that they provide, including costs, and when is it time to move into a new home in senior living. So without further ado, I'll let Michael tell us more about what he does. So welcome, Michael, and thank you for your time.
Good morning. Thank you, Lynn. My name is Michael Gill with Texas Senior Living Locators, as Lynn said. I run a locator service, and I've been doing this for 10 years. A locator service is sort of like an apartment hunting service in the sense that we're a free service to the families of seniors. So it's in that sense, I get paid a commission by wherever somebody ends up moving, so long as I introduce them. So it's a free service to the family. As I said, I've been doing this 10 years. When I got into the business, the first thing I did was went and visited every community in town before I sort of hung out my shingle as an expert. And for the last 10 years, I've been taking people on private tours of these communities. So I'll put people in my car, and then we go from assisted living to assisted living, or memory care to memory care, and we look at some of the various different options once we've narrowed things on down. So I've become an expert over the last 10 years and been doing it longer than anybody else in town. So what I want to share today is a lot of what goes on in the senior living industry, in the sense that a lot of people think about the senior living industry as nursing homes generically. But what's happened over the last 30 years since, or 40 years since the assisted living industry developed, is that it's gotten increasingly segmented into different parts. And so a lot of people think of it generically, but don't understand the differences between the different types of senior living. So what I want to do today is go over the different levels, which would be independent living, assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing homes, and just describe the differences and where people fit as they go through the senior living journey. Now, everybody's situation is going to be different. And when I talk to families, what we try and do is figure out, okay, what is this senior appropriate for? Where are they going to thrive the best? And then what does it look like 6 months down the road, a year down the road, 2 years down the road? And how can we, to the best extent we can, how can we anticipate people's needs and make sure the family sort of understands how the progression may end up going for their loved one. I prefer not to move somebody twice because moving is difficult at any age, and for seniors it's very difficult, particularly. And so we want to make sure that people understand what to anticipate, and hopefully, sometimes they'll move them to a higher level of care than they need today, but that's only because they're anticipating in 6 months they're going to need that higher level of care and it's less disruptive. So that's how my general process works. Now I want to go ahead and share my screen and start talking about the various different levels and how sort of the senior living industry thinks. We'll talk about pricing for some of the levels of care and how those change, and just try and give you, a general overview of everything. And I'm anticipating this presentation is going to last about 40 minutes, and then people are more than welcome to ask questions as they come on. So with that, let me go ahead and share my content and hope the technology works here well. So, okay, so senior living in Austin. Today is May 4th, 2022. My name is Michael Gill, and let's talk about, first off, when do people move to assisted living and why? So people stay at home generally as long as they can. Everybody's a little bit different, but there's obviously some support available at home. So there are private caregivers, there's personal assistant services agencies. So the personal assistant services agencies are like Home Instead, Visiting Angels, Halcyon Home, Senior Minded Home Care, these type of companies. And these are sort of senior sitters or people that will come on in and do some light housework and prepare some meals and help people with bathing and things like that. The reason I want to highlight this just a little bit to start is that personal assistant services companies, when they come into the house, they usually want a 4-hour minimum. And the reason for the 4-hour minimum is the fact that it doesn't make sense where people can't really staff their business appropriately without sending somebody to too many houses in one day. So generally they'll break it into morning sessions or afternoon sessions, and you have to have somebody for 4 hours. Given that it's priced at about $30 an hour these days for an agency, that's about $120 a day. If you have 4 hours a day coming into the house, would that be about $3,600 a month? And somewhere around 4 or 5 hours a day is where the break-even price is in terms of assisted living. Assisted living averages about $4,500 nationwide. So if you're having somebody about 5 hours a day, that's about at home, you could be finding some assisted living, more or less, and we'll talk more about that. But you could be finding an assisted living for about the same price. Home health care, those are the companies that will come on in and help with physical rehab and occupational rehab, and they can bring nursing services in. Home health care is paid for by Medicare. Personal assistant services agencies are privately paid for. Hospice, which our friend Dura at True Heart Hospice represents, is another service that comes into the house. And we've had a lot of hospice presentations, I'm sure. I won't go into that, but so those are the three agencies that come into the house. And then also, if somebody wants, they can hire a geriatric care manager, and the geriatric care manager can help coordinate all these different services for somebody if they want. Usually geriatric care managers are sort of like a daughter for hire, where if your loved ones live in New York City and you live down here, you can hire somebody to take care of them from afar and represent you and take them to doctors' offices and do home visits and make sure things are going okay. So when you're living at home, that's the available support. Now, when do you move from home? Now, this is an intensely personal decision, and I'm going to give you some guidelines. I'm going to tell you how people usually make that decision. But there are no rules for when you move from home, because it's up to you. I've got some rules though, because there are some non-negotiable reasons when you have to move. So, and they all center around safety. So number one, you have to move when somebody is a danger to themselves. So for somebody with dementia, for example, they could be a wander risk and wander outside. And in that case, if they can't find their way back home, they're a danger to themselves. If they're leaving the stove on inappropriately, if they're doing other things like taking their medications inappropriately, obviously that's not an acceptable scenario. So that's the first reason you have to move, is when they're a danger to themselves. Second reason is usually regarding somebody who's living alone, and that's when there's self-neglect. And so I think of it as when they'd be healthier someplace else. So in this case, they may not be necessarily taking their medications inappropriately, but they just may not be taking them consistently, for example. Or they may not be getting enough interaction with other people, and they're watching too much TV, or they're drinking for some reason, or they're just not eating appropriately. And so when there's self-neglect, that's another type of danger to an extent. Third reason you have to move is when there's caregiver issues. So there's a bunch of different scenarios I can go into here. For example, when there's an 85-year-old woman who's been taking care of her 90-year-old husband with dementia, but she's getting so old that she can't take care of them. Or when there are kids that have been having their parents live with them, but they go to work during the day, and at some point the parents aren't safe to stay home alone, and it becomes too expensive to hire a caregiver 8 hours a day. Or if you're out in a rural area and the caregivers don't always show up on a consistent basis, and if the caregiving is catastrophic, if they don't show up, these are reasons you have to move. Now, there are other reasons that people end up moving that aren't because of potentially catastrophic reasons. The reasons I usually find that people end up moving is, number one, incontinence. For a lot of people, at some level of incontinence, whether that's bowel or bladder, some people have a line in the sand where they just don't want to go and that don't feel like it's appropriate to take care of their loved one. Another one is surrounds sleep issues. Sometimes seniors get up all the time during the night to go to the bathroom, and there's such a big fall risk, a caregiver has to get up along with them. Or, for example, when somebody's not sleeping well, I mean, you can get up once, maybe twice a night before it becomes just too much for people. So that's another reason. A third reason would be when there's large risk of falls. So there are some people that are so heavy that they end up, that the loved one ends up having to call the fire department 2 or 3 times a week to get them off the floor. Or they just need help walking to and from the bathroom. And sometimes it's just too much and overwhelming. So these are things that, kick people out of the house in the sense that, or kick the decision off to have to move someplace else because it just becomes too much at home. This is what I usually see. But there's also people who understand it's sometimes better for everybody if they're in another scenario. For example, when you're a loved one and you're a caregiver, you're not much fun because you're stressed and it's always, come on, let's get you to the bathroom or whatever. And it's not a very pleasant relationship. And if you move somebody to an assisted living or a memory care, you get to be the loved one again. You get to be the entertainment committee. You get to be the one that they're excited to see instead of being the person who's just always having to take them to the bathroom or do other things like that. So these are the type of reasons that people end up moving for. And again, it's a very personal decision as to when to move, but these are just reasons why I want to sort of give you the idea of what other people do. Now, there are 4 different levels I'm going to talk about in terms of the senior living industry, and I'm going to go through them individually one by one. The first one, which is the least, it's sort of the lowest level, has the least caregiving assistance, are called independent living communities. Now, an independent living community is basically an apartment complex surrounding a centralized dining room with a meal plan and with some transportation services to and from doctor's offices into the Walgreens and maybe the supermarket. And they're called independent living communities because they're independent of caregivers and they're independent of licensing. So what that means is they're not licensed to provide any help with activities of daily living. The building is only there to provide the amenities such as a theater and the dining room. And you basically get 4 walls and some carpet, and you get to furnish it yourself. But they're not allowed to help you with any care. So, for example, if you fall, they usually will have a button that you can wear around on a pendant around your neck or on your wrist that you can push, and they'll come and say, "Oh goodness, you've fallen. Let me call 911." They really can't help you up because that's a big liability risk. So there's very little that the independent living community can do. But the independent living is sort of a nice bridge from staying at home and moving into an assisted living for a couple of reasons. Number one, they have a lot of amenities. They have a lot of activities. But one of the problems about staying at home is that staying at home can be a gilded cage. Yes, it's where we've been all of our life. Yes, we'd like to be there, but you can end up getting homebound and isolate at home. So by going to independent living, there's a lot more socialization. They've got an activities director. They've got a lot of facilities. So they have happy hours and they have movie theaters. And the emphasis is on the amenities. Now, one of the things that independent living communities can do is they usually will rent a room to an outside caregiving agency. And that outside caregiving agency can help you in your apartment, and they can almost make it look like assisted living light. Now, I mentioned earlier that these caregiving agencies, they want a 4-hour minimum if they're coming all the way to your house, just because the friction of going from house to house, they just can't make it work efficiently. But when they're in independent living communities, what they do is because they have an office downstairs, and they'll often have 5, 6 different caregivers that are in the building at any one time. What they're doing is they're going from Mrs. Moore's apartment in room 202 to Mrs. Gonzalez's apartment in 206 to Mrs. Smith's apartment up in 312, and they're doing a little bit of light housework for Mrs. Gonzalez, and for Mrs. Smith they're doing some medication management, and for Mrs. Moore they're giving her a shower. So they can do a little bit of help on a frequent basis. And to some extent, as I say, it can look like assisted living light, depending how much money you throw at the problem. So when they're doing this, they usually charge by, say, the quarter hour or the half hour, or by the activity. So they may charge, say, 3/4 of an hour for bathing, or they may just charge a flat rate of $20. Everybody's a little bit different, and you have to figure it out. but these outside caregiving agencies can do a lot of different things. And because they're in the building, it's a lot cheaper. Now it can add up, because if you have to have somebody stop by 3 times a day to do medication management, and if they charge $10 per visit, that's $30 a day, and that ends up being $900 a month. Or for dog walking services or things like this, they can do an awful lot of things, but it can add up. And the most important thing to understand, though, is it has to be schedulable. Schedulable is an interesting concept because it's different from assisted living. So in assisted living, you can go ahead and hit the pendant and say, gee, I can't find my remote control for the TV, or gee, I need help to go to the bathroom right now, and they'll help you to the bathroom. In independent living, if it's not scheduled that somebody's going to be there at 2:30 in the afternoon, you really can't get on-demand services. So that's the important thing to remember. So the time that when you need to move from independent living to assisted living is when, number one, you need unscheduled services. Number two, when you're not able to call for a lot of help and you need the help. And so that gets into sort of a safety type of issue as well. But independent living communities are a great option as sort of a bridge from the house to the higher levels of care. They're a great option for socialization. And sometimes they can be a little bit cheaper even than living at home, surprisingly. Now, independent living communities, the least expensive independent living in town is somewhere around $2,200 a month for a studio apartment. Now that includes all utilities, includes basic cable, includes the transportation services, includes the activities director, and it includes 3 meals a day, usually. Some places include 2 meals a day, but usually more often, about 80% of the time, I'd say it's 3 meals a day. So at $2,200, including meals, that can be pretty cheap. The most expensive in town is probably about $7,500 a month. And that's going to be someplace with a downtown view and 2 bedrooms and a much bigger apartment. So in a studio apartment, you're going to end up in independent living. You're probably going to get about 380 to 450 square feet. In a 2-bedroom apartment, you may get as much as about 1,250 square feet, just to give you an idea. The typical 1-bedroom apartment is going to be about 525 square feet, but they can get up, 1-bedroom apartments can get as high as 750 square feet, just to give you an idea. And 2-bedroom apartments are about 800 square feet to about 1,250 square feet. So if that gives you an idea of what independent living can be. Now remember, independent living is all private pay. When I say all private pay, in this case, that also means that long-term care insurance won't pay for independent living, because independent living is not a healthcare facility. It's not an assisted living. So this is all coming out of your savings or out of your out of your monthly cash flow. So that's independent living communities. The next level we're going to talk about is assisted living communities. Let's see how I can move. There we go. So the difference, now assisted living communities are similar to independent living communities in that they're apartments surrounding a centralized dining room with a meal plan. But they have caregivers in the building. And instead of the caregivers being from an outside agency, the caregivers are run by the same company that runs the hospitality services. Now, assisted living communities is what we call custodial care, and it's focused on activities of daily living. Many of you have probably heard the term activities of daily living, but for those of you who haven't, you have to understand that that's actually a technical term within the industry. There are 7 activities of daily living, and I've got them listed up here: dressing, bathing, eating, transferring, toileting, incontinence. Now those first 6 are what we call official activities of daily living. And they're official just because for long-term care insurance and for veterans benefits, you're supposed to require help with 2 out of those 6 activities of daily living in order to qualify medically for your caregiving expenses to be somewhat covered. The 7th activity of daily living is medication management. And for some reason, that's not considered as an official activity of daily living. But what I want you to understand about this is that none of these activities are things that are quote unquote medical necessity, okay? So you don't need a nurse to do this. You don't need anybody with any certifications. All these can be done by somebody, not even as a high school grad that, that just has common sense, dressing and bathing and these type of things. And so that's why this is considered custodial care. In a minute, we're going to talk about skilled nursing. And skilled nursing is where you get skilled services, such as not only including rehab, but things like ventilators, tracheotomies, shots, something where you have to have a nurse on site. So in assisted living communities, there's a couple of different distinctions I want to talk about too. So in the state of Texas, if somebody is renting rooms to residents and they're providing help with any of these activities of daily living, then if there's 4 or more people living there unrelated, then that has to be licensed as an assisted living. You're a small assisted living when you have between 4 and 17 beds, or 4 and 16 beds, and 17 beds and over, you're a large assisted living. Now, there are some small personal care homes that have only 3 beds. The reason they only have 3 beds is that way they don't have to be licensed. And that we call those personal care homes sometimes. And I like personal care homes. They can be very good. And occasionally those are important to me because sometimes they can do things that you can't do in a licensed setting because they're unlicensed. So at any rate, that's the difference between small and large assisted livings. But there's also another distinction that's called a type A and a type B assisted living. In a type A assisted living, everybody, all the residents have to be physically fit enough to be able to self-evacuate within 13 minutes. In a type B assisted living, there has to be enough staff to help everybody out, even if they're not able to self-evacuate. So in a type A facility, in theory, if somebody gets there and just, for example, has a stroke or declines to the point where they're in a wheelchair all the time, in theory, they're supposed to move out when they can no longer self-evacuate. So that's something to understand because that could create the need for a second move. And that's why a lot of people prefer type B assisted livings to go to so that there's no doubt that they can stay for the long haul. Now, assisted living, at some point in the distant past, some assisted living tried to do too much. And there was a scandal and somebody died because they weren't able to handle some level of care. So regulators went ahead and they tried to come up with some bright lines as to when you have to go to skilled nursing and can no longer be in assisted living communities. So as a new resident, and that's an important distinction, as a new resident, assisted livings are prohibited by regulation from accepting bedbound residents. That's somebody who cannot assist with their transfer at all. So that's somebody who can't, even if you help them up, they couldn't support their weight and things like that. So ventilators, feeding tubes, tracheotomies, IV drips, all those are generally prohibited by regulation. And if you'll notice, I just said generally. So I've qualified it a little bit because there are times when all of these regulations are a little bit of a gray area. And so sometimes you can accept somebody who's bedbound, depending on how much assistance they can give. So if somebody can sit up and sort of move around in bed a little bit and help, some assisted livings will deem that as helping with transferring, and therefore they will accept people at that level of care. But as a general guidance and general rule, and again, that just means it's 95% of the time, if you're bedbound, no assisted living is going to be able to take you. Ventilators are another thing I'm just finding out recently, actually, that it used to be that ventilators were just like, no way. There are certain types of ventilators these days that are sort of similar to CPAP machines that potentially some assisted livings would accept. Some places will accept some types of feeding tubes, not other type of feeding tubes. And so there are always a little bit of wiggle room depending, but in general, these are the types of things that by regulation, assisted living communities won't accept, and that those type of people have to go to skilled nursing. Now back to the bedbound client, if somebody is near, is a very difficult transfer case, sometimes it's better to move to an assisted living earlier than later, because at some point you pass the time when you can no longer move into an assisted living as a bedbound resident. So when I talked about bedbound residents, what I did say, if you remember, that as a new resident, you can't move in if you're bedbound. You're allowed to age in place in assisted living, however. And if somebody ages, comes in on a walker, but ages to the point where they're bedbound, assisted livings are allowed to keep them. They're just not allowed to accept them as a new resident if they're bedbound. So the warning here is not to wait too long, because sometimes if you wait too long, you will age out of being able to go to an assisted living, and you'll only be able to go to skilled nursing at that point. So those are things that, when I'm trying to help people, we're trying to focus on. And that's an issue of when do you move? And so in this case, it's better to move too soon than too late, because if you move too late, you may not be able to move at all. And so remember that, because I'm going to come back to the concept of moving too soon versus too late in a minute. Now, the last point I have here on assisted living communities is that it says, again, all private pay. When I say all private pay, what this means is Medicare, Medicaid will not pay for anything in an assisted living community, period, full stop, here in Hayes, Travis, and Williamson counties. Medicaid used to pay for some assisted living, but because their reimbursement was so low, nobody could make money doing it. So there's no place in town that accepts any Medicaid for assisted living. Apparently in other cities, there are a couple of places that will accept Medicaid, but there's not any that I know of here in Austin, in Hayes, Travis, and Williamson counties. The other thing is, though, that long-term care insurance will pay for assisted living if you have long-term care insurance. However, only about 4% of the people in assisted living are there being paid for long-term care insurance. So it's not necessarily rare, but it's quite uncommon as well. So really comes on down to, how do you pay for assisted living? Pretty much the way you pay for assisted living is out of your cash flow. That means from your Social Security, and then you supplement your Social Security with your savings. So when I go over people's money, what we always try and figure out is, okay, how much money do you have coming in from Social Security and pensions? How much money do you have in the bank? And then what is the equity value of your house? But that's usually the treasure hunt that goes on. We can always ask about long-term care insurance and about veterans benefits, but that's more rare. Veterans benefits, let me just mention here for a second. There is a program called Veterans Aid and Attendance Benefits. If you have Veterans Aid and Attendance Benefits, that means that you served in the military during a time of war. You didn't have to be in the war, you didn't have to be overseas, but you had to have served during a time of war. These days, there's very few people left from World War II, but for the Korean War went from January 31st, 1950 to, June 21st, 1950 to January 31st, 1955. And then the Vietnam era started August 5th, 1964. So if you served one day during that time frame, you may be eligible for some long-term care benefits from the Veterans Administration. The veteran himself can get paid about over $2,000 a month from the veterans benefits. The widow can get paid about $1,350 per month. There are other criteria. You have to have medical necessity, and that comes back to the point I said earlier about requiring help with 2 out of 6 activities a day living. And then the third thing is, you can't be too rich. So you're not allowed to have more than about $135,000 of assets outside of your homestead. So that's just for assisted living. The last thing, let's talk about the price of assisted living. I said earlier that assisted living nationwide, the average cost is about $4,500 a month. That's average. I find it's probably a little bit higher. In general, I have a hard time finding good assisted living under about $3,000 to $3,500. That's pretty much rock bottom, about $3,000 a month. And that's usually for shared room. Generally, shared rooms in a small private personal care home, they're going to charge about $4,000 for a shared room and about $5,000 for a private room. And that's gone up a lot over the last year because of inflation and stuff. In a large assisted living, a studio generally runs about $4,500 and a private room runs about $5,500. Now, in assisted living, those base prices are just that. The base price gets you the 4 walls and some carpet, 3 meals a day, and activities and things like that. On top of that base price, there are charges for the extra levels of care. And generally, the extra levels of care can go up to about $2,000. And more often than not, it's capped at about $2,000. There's some places that can go up a little bit higher than that, depending. And everybody's got a different caregiver pricing scheme. And when I say they've got a different pricing scheme, I'll say that, about half their communities will go ahead and have levels of care. So every level of care might be $400 to $500, and there may be 4 to 5 levels of care. So if you're in level 1, that's $450. Level 2 is $900. Level 3 is $1,350, et cetera. And they decide which level that you fall under, usually by doing an assessment, try and figure out how much time during every day your caregiving needs are going to take. They put a point value on there, and then from up to 30 points, it's level 1, up to 60 points is level 2. And I'm sort of making this up as I go along, but this is the general sense of how they decide what they're going to charge you. So if you got a 1-bedroom apartment at about $5,500 a month, most people I talk to usually need about $800 to $1,200 of extra care. So for a 1-bedroom apartment, we might be talking $6,300 to $6,700. If you're getting a studio apartment down around $4,000 or $3,800, you might need $600 extra care. That may only take you up to $4,500. This is the general range of how things end up going. If I tried, I could spend about $14,000 a month on an assisted living apartment. That would get you a 2-bedroom apartment with a view, with a balcony, and lots of care. Okay, that's the extraordinary cost. Generally, a very expensive assisted living is going to be, for one person, about $8,000 would be the highest level, or the higher levels of care. Things that really kick things up, some people need things like nebulizers. Some people, incontinence kicks you up to a higher level of care. The closer to being bedbound you are, the more the care levels are, et cetera. Some of the things that you want to consider too is many communities can only handle what we call a 1-person transfer. That's when one caregiver can help somebody up enough that they can get to a walker. Some communities will not do 2-person transfers because they don't have enough caregivers on staff at any one time to be able to take 2 caregivers off the floor and not helping other people to help somebody with the 2-person transfer. And the highest level of transfer is a Hoyer lift, where there's a personal crane that kind of comes on into your room and picks somebody up in a little sling like a stork would, and moves them from the bed to a wheelchair or something like that. So when we go in and look and do tours of places, you want to ask, what levels of care can you handle? And what types of things would cause you to ask my loved one to move out because you no longer meet their needs? In some cases, that level of transfer is one of them. But I mentioned the levels of transfer because the high levels of transfer and high incontinence are usually the 2 things that put you up at the highest level of extra care needs. So that's an assisted living community. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is a memory care community. And when I talk about memory care, one of the things to understand is that a memory care community is a type of assisted living, but it has an additional certification. So here's my memory care slide. But what you want to, so every memory care is an assisted living. And with the additional certification for memory care, it means a couple of things. Number one, it's going to have a lock on the front door. And when we say a lock on the front door, we're not saying it's a locked facility. We prefer to just call it a secure facility, because what we're doing is we're trying to make sure people don't wander out for their safety. We're not trying to lock them down to be mean or anything. The second thing, a certification, an Alzheimer's certification means for somebody in this memory care is that there's generally going to be about twice as many caregivers as in an assisted living. So in an assisted living, you're generally going to have 12 to 14 residents per caregiver, sometimes not even that many. In a memory care, you're generally going to have 6 to 8 residents per caregiver. So that's obviously a much more favorable ratio. And the reason for that is because every hour is a different day in memory care. And you can't really do cost accounting on somebody in memory care. You have to go ahead and just have a lot of people around, because a lot of the memory care people, they need redirection and things like that. There's a lot more incontinence that goes on. There's just a lot more care, and you can't really anticipate what that care is going to be on a day-to-day basis. At any rate, so they're all always assisted living. They're always a type B assisted living. Because obviously the memory care residents, they can't always self-evacuate or wouldn't know what a fire alarm means and things like that. And so, but the next thing to talk about is that they're more expensive than assisted living. However, probably 60 to 80% of the memory cares are all inclusive. So when you talk about a base price in memory care, often that base price includes almost all their care. Now, everybody's a little bit different, and that's why I say almost and put in that qualifier. So a lot of places are all inclusive except for incontinence, or they're all inclusive, but that doesn't include a nebulizer or a two-person transfer. Sometimes they have an extra added extended care cost. So it's always a little bit different, and pricing is always awkward to talk about, because number one, it changes because people are trying to attract clients sometimes, and number two, it's hard to get apples to apples comparisons. So I'm going to give you in general, I'll say that a shared room in memory care costs about $4,500 a month, all inclusive, and about $5,800 a month these days for a private room in memory care. Usually that includes everything except incontinence supplies. Incontinence supplies are something the family has to provide mostly, unless they're on hospice, where a hospice would provide the incontinence supplies. And incontinence supplies, call it $150 what that costs on a per month basis. So that's usually an extra. As I say, there's exceptions to every rule. There's a couple of communities that include the incontinence supplies in the basic fee. And there's some people that, as I say they're all inclusive, but there is the extended care cost, usually for the last 4 months of life, when somebody's a two-person transfer and has to be spoon-fed or something like that. And again, memory care is all private pay, just like assisted living. Long-term care benefits and veterans benefits could contribute to it, but nothing from Medicare or Medicaid will pay for memory care. So that's memory care. Now, one of the questions that people often have is, when do you go from assisted living to memory care? So let's talk just for a second about memory care in the 3 levels we just talked about. So in a memory care community, you have to have a dementia diagnosis in order to be able to be put in a memory care community. And that's because of the fact that's a locked facility. And so, putting somebody in a locked facility, there's risk of somebody abusing the system. That's why they want to make sure you have a doctor's diagnosis. So 100% of the people in any memory care do have dementia. In an assisted living, probably 50 to 75% of the people have some degree of dementia, okay? A lot of the reasons that people go there is because dementia is driving their lack of mobility or their lack of safety and things like that. Even in independent living, you're going to have maybe 15 to 25% of the people who have a little bit of dementia. Usually it's not as severe though. So you will have people in wheelchairs in a very advanced state in assisted living. And you can stay in assisted living so long as they can meet your needs. One of the reasons to move to memory care from assisted living is when somebody can't use the button to call for help anymore. So that's one reason to move. Another reason is if there's not enough caregiving available and you need a lot more caregiving because you're memory care, that's another reason to move, because I talked about there's more caregivers there. A third reason to move from assisted living to memory care is because the activities are more designed for people with memory care issues. You can't go ahead and have an hour and a half activity for somebody in memory care. They just cannot pay attention for that long. But sometimes you'll have longer activities in assisted living. So, and then the last reason is that sometimes people with memory care issues, they feel more isolated in an assisted living because there's not as many other people to talk to or nobody wants to pay attention to them. And so sometimes it's better to be around peers, even though the peers are not as, cognitively capable. Sometimes people don't want to isolate, and some people are more confident being around other people in a similar condition. So that's one reason why you move from assisted living to memory care, or why you go to memory care instead of having to stop in assisted living. So those are just some thoughts about the differences when you may want to move from assisted living to memory care. Next level of care I'm going to talk about is the skilled nursing facility. And the first thing I'm to know, the overriding thing to know about a skilled nursing facility is that you go to a skilled nursing facility because the government is paying for it about 80% of the time. So in a skilled nursing facility, about 58% of the residents nationwide in any given assisted living are there on Medicaid, okay? Then about just under 20% of any skilled nursing facilities residents are there on Medicare. And then somewhere between 20 and 25% of the residents are there because they're privately paying. So in a skilled nursing facility, the communities themselves, they'd rather have short-term residents because those are the most profitable, and the least profitable are the Medicaid residents. Medicaid residents are generally there, obviously, because they don't have enough money, but they have medical necessity. They have the two requirements are financial, and so you're not allowed to have more than about $2,500 of income and no more than $2,000 of assets to qualify for Medicaid. That's the financial qualification. Then medical necessity qualification is that you have to have requirements, generally 2 activities a day of living. But I would say that about 90% of people on Medicaid are there because of cognitive issues. They're no longer safe to be at home. So that's why a very high percentage of long-term residents have dementia. Now, a skilled nursing, the people who pay there privately, they have complex medical needs. And as I say, they may have ventilators or feeding tubes, but they may need to have a nurse 24/7 because of things like diabetes or things like that, or they have severe dementia. So again, the other thing to think about with the skilled nursing facility is it's the medical model. So in assisted living is custodial care. Skilled nursing is you go there for medical necessity. And so when I say it's the medical model, the skilled nursing facilities, generally they do the half wagon wheel design, where in the middle they have a nursing desk, a very large nursing desk where 6 or 8 people can sit at it. And then that nursing desk can look down 6 halls. So there's 2 halls to the left and right, and 2 halls sort of off to about, 75 degrees to the left and 125 degrees to the right. And what that means, though, is that the nursing desk can look down all of the different halls and see what's going on. But generally in the skilled nursing, during the day, they're going to have about 16 residents per caregiver. And at night, they may have 25 to 30 residents per caregiver. And the aides end up going from room to room to room to room. And it's not as good care. It's not as kind and gentle as it's going to be in an assisted living or in a memory care. So the only reason you really go there is because you have a high degree of medical necessity, or you need the government to pay for it. So that's generally what goes on in a skilled nursing facility. If you're paying privately, the price these days, I guess the cheapest price these days is about $180 a day, which would be about $5,400 a month. And I suspect that's gone up more recently. So it might be as much as $6,000 a month in a skilled nursing. So that's going to be as expensive or more expensive than in the memory care. And as I say, I have a personal bias against skilled nursing homes. I don't think the care is near as good as I can get in memory care. But there's a lot of people who end up going there for various and sundry reasons. There's about 52 nursing homes around the Austin area. I'm going to touch on continuing care retirement communities just for a second, because it's a longer, more detailed conversation. We only have 5 CCRCs in town. A CCRC is someplace that has all 4 levels of care on the same campus. So that's all, it has independent living, assisted living, memory care, and skilled nursing on the same campus. As I say, there's 5 of them in town, and you see the names up there: Westminster, Querencia, Longhorn Village, Butner Villas, and Wesley. Now, the first 3 of them, Westminster, Querencia, and Longhorn Village, are buy-in places. They call these life care communities. So you generally have to put a large down payment down, and the one payment, and this slide's a little bit old. Basically, at this point, a 1-bedroom down payment is going to be about $400,000 and up, and a 2-bedroom is going to be about $500,000 and up. And then there's 2 nonprofits, Butner Villas and Wesleyan, where there's no upfront fee, but they're very well priced, I would say, and very nice places, but they don't have life care. When I say life care, what that means is in the buy-in communities, as you go from independent living to assisted living and memory care, you get special rates because of the buy-in, and you don't get those special rates on the higher levels of care at Butner Villas at Wesley. There's a bunch of different places around town that are near CCRCs. So like Brookdale, Westlake, which has a skilled nursing and an assisted living on campus and independent living, but doesn't have memory care. Or Ledgestone, which doesn't have skilled nursing, or Enclave. So one of the things that is going on a lot in the industry these days is that there are more places being built that have 3 levels of care: independent living, assisted living, and memory care on the same campus. I don't know of any place that's been built in the last 10 years that has skilled nursing included as well, not in the Austin area at least. So call me, talk to me more about CCRCs. It's a small segment of the market here in town and gets more complicated, but I did want to just introduce it because a lot of people ask about it. So in the Austin area, just so people know, and I need to update this slide because it's about 3 years old, there's about 52 skilled nursings. There's about 55 large assisted livings, somewhere in the high 40s, small assisted livings. There's over 60 memory cares in town at this point. This slide shows you pretty much the general size. Skilled nursing run usually about 120 beds. There's some smaller ones, and that's why the average size has gone down. Large assisted livings generally around 80 beds, small assisted livings around 12 beds. Memory care tends to be on the smaller side, around 26. And everything is growing quite quickly, or had been growing quite quickly up until the beginning of the pandemic. The pandemic put a stop on a lot of the growth in the senior living community. And so we have, in the last 2 years, the growth has slowed down a lot. And just recently, we've been having some places with wait lists. Up until the beginning of the pandemic, there was pretty much no wait lists in town except for the CCRCs. Now I've got about 6 places where I'm having to deal with wait lists, which is a new experience for us because I've never had wait lists in the last 10 years. So that's becoming a little bit of a problem. We usually can find workarounds if somebody has to do a quick move. If you have time to do a longer move, the wait lists aren't that long, just a couple of months in general. The place where there are a lot of wait lists are in the high-end facilities, in independent living. The 2-bedroom apartments, there can be over 3-year wait lists some places for some reason. And I attribute that to the fact that the housing market's gone up by so much over the last 2 or 3 years that people have become much less price sensitive at some of the high-end communities. But that's not all that important for most people. At any rate, my name is Michael Gill of Texas Senior Living Locators. That is, I'm trying to get you to my last page here. That is the end of my presentation. I'm willing to take questions for anybody who has them at this point. Pete, I think that means you. And you're muted if you want to say it. There you go.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. Well, you gave a nice overview of the differing facilities and what it takes, including the touching on when the whens and whys, I guess, to make such a move. And that's like you had mentioned, it's pretty much a personal decision, and I realized that, and that's something I think about every day, pretty much. But I'm not really there yet, I guess. I mean,
in memory care, it's always interesting to figure out when the right time to move is. One thing I would say is I'd always rather move too early than too late. And in memory care, the reason I say that is you may give up some quality of life on the front end, but you gain it on the back end. And by that, I mean, I've seen a lot of cases where somebody stays at home so long that by the time they get to the memory care, they have a hard time adjusting. And when you move them out of a long-term home, you lose their memory pathways. And when they get to the skill to a memory care or a higher a level of senior care, then they have a hard time finding their bathroom or finding their way to the meals or to the activities. And getting them there earlier, they can sort of develop those memory pathways when they're in better shape. And so, yes, you're moving out of the long-term home, you're moving away from the relatives, but by getting there early, you're giving them a better chance to thrive through the end of life and be more comfortable through the end of life. It's certainly a personal decision, and I will tell you that no matter when you move them, it's going to be an emotional day. And no matter when you move them, you're going to have some guilt that you didn't do it longer, better, smarter, or something. And I speak from personal experience with that, because there's no right way or wrong way to do it. The loved one will adapt, and they're going to have to adapt eventually. But it's such a pernicious disease that it's really hard to come up with any perfect rules as when the right time to move is, because everybody's different. And one thing to understand too is that the first 2 weeks to a month are going to be difficult when you move them. A lot of communities recommend that the family of the resident doesn't come to visit them during the 2 weeks. That's not a rule, certainly. That's just a lot of people's personal belief. What's the kindest thing to do is. Because for the first couple of weeks, often when the family gets there, the resident's going to be asking to, can we go home now? I'm not happy. Why did you do this to me? And some guilt trips can be played in certain circumstances. And it just takes a while for them to get comfortable with the idea. They will get there, but it doesn't feel good. The emotional part of this is one of the biggest things that you kind of have to recognize. There's an emotional part, and then there's a thinking part. And what I've tried to give you is a little bit of the thinking part, but I want to acknowledge that the emotional part is difficult for everybody. And it's never going to be easier to do it. I do tell people, never let a good crisis go to waste. Because if somebody goes to the hospital, that's a good time to make a move. You don't go home, you go straight to memory care. You blame the doctor. So that feels a little better for you. And, it's a little bit more understandable of this is just the next place you're going. This is where you get more rehab. This is where the care needs to be. I'm still going to be here every day. Makes it emotionally a little bit easier. Keep that in mind. When there is a crisis and you go to the hospital, remember that generally you have a 3-night stay. If you have a 3-night stay in the hospital, you automatically get to go to a skilled nursing home for rehab. And sometimes that 3 weeks gives you enough time to make the move, to go visit places, get the furniture moved on over, and have them have everything ready for when they move out of the skilled nursing into a memory care. At that point, it just seems like the next level of care. Hospital, skilled nursing, memory care, that's just sort of a natural progression, and they don't have near as much hesitancy or rejection. So just some thoughts.
Yeah, that was I guess that was some good thoughts or good advice, which some of that I hadn't considered, I guess.
If I may add over here, and I'm looking at it, I always look at, at everything that I hear through a caregiver side.
And real quick, Lynn, should I stop recording at this point?
Yeah, okay, that would be good.
Okay.